Assalamualaikum and hi to everyone. Thank you for watching this video. So in this video, we'll talk about another chapter that called ERD. So in the previous chapter, we already learned about the DFD, data flow diagram. So now we will learn about the entity relationship diagram or ERD. So ERD is refer to the entity and the relationship. In DFD, we already learned about the what is the external entity. So now we need to know how to express or how to present the entity that we already found in our DFD into another diagram that we call ERD. So the objective for this chapter, you should be able to do a modeling on the ERD or on the entity relationship and draw the entity relationship for any information system, especially for your project. So ER model is the construct and the convention used to create a model of the user data. If you already learned about the OOP, I believe you already know what is the class diagram. Okay, in the ERD, it look like the class diagram, but it have quite a different term. So the results are documented in the entity relationship diagram. And ERD is the entity relationship model, entities, attribute, and relations. So there are three terms. Okay, there are three terms. The first one is about the entity. The second is about the attribute, and the third one is about the relation. And it also display the connectivity and the cardinality. Either the relationship is one-to-one, one-to-many, or many-to-one, and so on. So that is the ERD in the theoretically. Okay, so these are the three elements that I already mentioned. We have the entity, attribute, and relationship. So in order to present your entity and the relationship through the ERD model, you need to know the symbol. Okay, so first we look at the entity as the element. The symbol that we use is the rectangular. So the blue color is not necessary because the themes of this slide is blue, so I make it in a blue color. Okay, so the symbol is rectangle. So rectangles in the ERD model, it shows the object. The object can be the person, it can be the place, event, or any concept that which you want to store the information in the database. So anything that you want to store the information in the database, it must be appear in your ERD. The second is about the attribute. Okay, so it's look like this one. Okay, we have the entity. So inside the entity, later on, we have another row that belong to the attribute. So attribute is the property or characteristic of the entity or the relationship type. Means that we have the entity. For example, let's say we have person or student as the entity. So the attribute of the student is student name, student ID, student program, and so on. So that's are the attributes of the entity. And then the third element is about the relationship. Okay, the relationship, the interaction between entities that represented by a verb. Student register course. Yeah, register is the verb. So the relationship is based on the verb. So until this part, you should know that these are the symbol that you will going to use when you want to represent your ERD diagram. Okay, we have to find chain model and crowd food model. So let's look at the change notation first. Okay, entity, it look like this one, and then we have the relationship and attribute. Entity, person, place, object. Relationship, the association between the instance of one or more entity type, and the attribute is the name properties of the characters. Okay. So it will change, it will represent a set of collection of objects in the real world that share the same properties. This one is on the share notation. And then here we have the crowd food notation. So the entity look like this one. Okay, and then you put the entity name inside the rectangle here. Then we have the attribute. So these are the attribute, entity's name and list of the attribute, and the relationship look like an arrow. Okay, just a line here, and with the verb phrase. So this one is based on the cross foot notation. Okay, the previous one is based on the chain notation. Entity, verb phrase for the relationship, and the attribute name. So this one and this one also acceptable, but I prefer you use attribute as the symbol. Okay. We go for the entities first. Look for the example here. So entity is a person, place, object, event, or concept which you want to store the information in the database. Okay, the previous slide also mentioned the same thing. So example of the entities, we can have the employee, student, patient, academic staff, non-academic staff, and then we have it can be also a place, store, warehouse, headquarters, and so on. Object, it can be machine, a car, a product. Okay, because product have the label, product have the expiry date. Okay, example. Event is just like a sale, registration, renewal. Okay, and concept like account, cost. So these are the example of the entities. So in order to naming or define your entity type, okay, you can use this guideline. An entity type name is a singular noun. Okay, only you name it as a singular noun. An entity type should be descriptive and specific. And then must have an attribute and unique key. So because we want to store the data and the information inside your database, so you must have the unique key to identify that attribute of the entity, and will become a table in the database. Okay, so these are the entities. Okay, let's say in your system, you create ordering system. So one of the table entities that involved in your ordering system is a client or customers. So one table for customers. Inside the customers table, you have many column that contain of the attribute. Okay, what is entity type? Entity type is a collection of entities which share the same characteristic. Okay. And what is the entity instance? Entity instance are the data for entity type. So basically, these are the explanation regarding the entity type, entity instance related to the entity. Okay, we already know about the entity. Next, we go detail for the attribute. So example of entity type and associated attributes. Okay, for example, we have student as the entity, student ID, student name, home address, phone number, major in study, for example, are the attribute of the student, attribute to the entity. So these are the guidelines that you can follow when you want to naming your attribute. So first, an attribute name is a noun. An attribute name should be unique. Okay. To make an attribute name unique and clear, each attribute name should follow a standard format. Okay, let's say you have teachers and student. Try to make it unique and easy for you to identify. Student name, teacher's name. So it make unique and clear. So similar attribute of different entities type should use similar but distinguishing name. Okay. Okay, this example here. So attribute is character of the entity or object. So example here we have the book. So in our book, okay, let's say you have this book. In this book, okay, we have the book code. We have the book title. We have the author of the book. Okay, we have the price. Okay, we have the price of the book. We have the publisher code. Publisher code. So this is book as the object, and in a book we have the attribute, and we want to store this information in our database. So you need to decide how to identify each book in your database, either using the book title. Okay, let's say we have web technology, so they may there is the possibility that another book also use the same title. So how to identify the unique of this object? So we use the book ID or book code. So different book have different ID identifier as the identifier, and because that is the unique, so we put it as the primary key. So in our entity we have book, in our book we have the attribute, and in attribute we have the primary key to identify that is the book that we want to find. And then we also have the secondary key. Okay, one we go for the database part. So in the cross foot notation, it look like this one. Okay, foreign, this one is foreign key. So publisher code means we have the publisher. Your publisher have their own attribute. Okay, and that one publisher code is the primary key on the publisher table, so it can be the foreign key in this book table. Okay, that is the how database work. Okay, so we focus on how we want to represent that attribute. So this one is the cross foot, and this one is the change notation. Okay, so next part we go for the type of attribute that transfer to from the cross foot notation. So next is about the type of attribute. So type of attribute we have simple, multi-value, composite, and derived. So simples mean the attribute that hold a single value like gender. So either female or female. There's no between male and female, okay? And then multi-value, an attribute that have more than one value. A staff may have two telephone numbers, so we call as the attribute with multi-value. Okay, example, we have phone number. So how to represent it in a symbol? So we have the double loop here. Okay, this for the simple, this for the multi-value. And then the third one, we have the composite, an attribute that can be broken down or categorized into component part. Okay, example, we have name, first name, last name, middle name. Okay, so this is how we can represent it. So name, first name, last name. So it's based on the name. And then number 4, we have the derive. So an attribute where the values can be calculated from a related attribute. Okay, for example, okay, we have attribute a date of a birth. Okay, date of birth. So based on that attribute, you can get another values which is referred to age. So this is a derive and attribute. So how we represent in a symbol is look like this one. We have date of birth and then age with the putus-putus. So okay. So this one is the example of the entities and the attribute. So please, what we should do based on these entities and the attribute, transform it into this kind of symbol. Okay, in this one, in the Crawford symbol or chain notation. So and then submit it as the attendant for this part. That's all. Thank you and assalamualaikum. Then later on we continue on the relationship.